Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am here with the next update for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. It's a project that I started this year to get some more use out of my eyeshadow palette and get to know them one by one individually. So this project entails a few different parts. The main part of the project is, like I said, regarding my palettes. And each month I work on 4 different palettes, one per week, kind of. And I want to make 3 exclusive looks with those palettes. I share those looks with you in this video, and I also go ahead and rate the palette. So I have 4 different categories, and I give a score out of 1 to 5 and give the palette a total score to compare with other palettes. So that's the main part of the project. I also have 2 more parts. The other, second largest part is my eyeshadow bank, which was heavily inspired by Lara Force. It's basically a way for me to call my eyeshadow purchasing. I talk you through kind of what points I've earned, as well as if I spent any, and all of that kind of good stuff. And then the last part is Expand Those Pans, which was inspired by Dora. I will have her link down below as well. And that project is basically one where you work on eyeshadows you already pan on, and your goal is just to expand those pans. I have a usage goal for those eyeshadows for 5 uses. So I'll talk you through the eyeshadows I worked on in that project too. And all of those eyeshadows come from the palette that I work on, by the way. So if I do have pans on any of the palettes that I work on, I roll those in to expand those pans. So 1 per palette, if that makes sense. So those are the different parts of this project. I'm going to jump straight into it because these videos always end up being super long. But before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I'm going to start off with my eyeshadow bank and just talk you through what points I've earned and where I stand today. I usually do that anyway, and I feel like that makes most sense. So starting off, let's look at the numbers. So as of the start of June, I had a balance of 26 negative points. And my rules are that I can't go into the negative on my own, but if I'm gifted something, I can go into the negative. So that's what happened at the beginning of the year. And I still had 26 points to dig myself out of, and that is where I started off in June. So looking at the points that I've earned, I did have 5 palettes that I hit no pan left behind on, and I do get 1 point per no pan left behind. And also, by the way, if you're new to this project, I need 10 points for every eyeshadow that I purchase. So yeah, if I bring in 1 eyeshadow, that it's 10 points in my beauty eyeshadow budget. So the 5 palettes that I hit no pan left behind on was the ColourPop Sweet Talk, which was in this project last month. And then we have the other 4 palettes that are in this project now this month. So we have the Natasha Denona Sendo, the McGrath Bronze Seduction, the ColourPop Aha Honey, and the Kos Sashimi City. So those are the 5 palettes that I hit no pan left behind on in the past month. So that was 5 points there. Moving on to the next category, which is the largest category. That is my 10 uses. So every time I hit the 10 use threshold on an eyeshadow, I get 1 point. And in the past month, I managed to get 18 points in this category. And the eyeshadows that I got those points from was, first up, my ColourPop Super Shock Shadow in Amaze. I had 10 uses there for a total of 20 for the year. Next up is my Burberry eyeshadow in Rosewood, which is my brow shade. And this one, I got 40 uses on in the month of June for a total of 180 total, which is really, really high. Then we have a shade from my Product Level Up, which is the shade Snowman. I got 10 uses on that one. Then a couple from my Panda palette. We had Rose Pink, which I got 30 uses on for a total of 60 for the year. I also have Burnt Orange, where I got 10 uses for a total of 50. Rustic, 10 uses for a total of 20. Glistening, 10 uses for a total of 60. And then lastly, for now, we have Fairy, with just 10 uses in total. So those are some of my Panda palette shades. Then we had 1 shade in my Gold Obsessions palette from Huda Beauty, which is currently in my rolling project pan. And I used that shade 10 times as well. That's the 2nd shade in the palette. I also reached for the Nude Obsessions palette from Huda Beauty as well. And that is just a blending out shade. And that is the 5th shade in the palette, which I also used 10 times. We have 2 more shades from my Panda palette next. We have the shade Sienna and the shade Bronze, which are both used 10 times each. Sienna I have used 30 times total in this year, and Bronze I've used 20 times total so far this year. So those are all of the shades from my Panda palette, and we have 1 last shade to talk about, and that is the shade Winter Star from Terra Moons, which is a single, and I've used that one 10 times so far. So those are all of the points that I've earned regarding usage. So 18 points there, which is really, really good. We did not hit any threshold for 100 uses this month. If I do get 100 uses, I get 5 points, but for now, I haven't hit that at all. Then we have a couple pans for the month as well, and all of those pans actually came from Odin's Eye palettes. We have 3 from the Merry Christmas palette, and we have the shade Little Star, the shade Santa Star, and Snowman. So those are 3 pans there. And then the last palette again was our Odin's Eye palette, and that is the Hey Reindeer palette, where I hit pan on the shade Christmas Ham. So those are 4 pans in the month of June. The last category where I can earn points is from finished eyeshadow, and for every finished eyeshadow I get 5 points, which basically means half a shadow. And I am happy to say that I have a finished shadow in the month of June actually, and that one came from my Soft Glam palette, which is my Panda palette again, and I finished up the shade Rose Pink. So that is 1 finished shade for a total of 5 points for that category. So that is all of the points that I've earned. If you sum all of those up, that is 32 points earned, which I'm so happy with. That means that I am in the positive, at least very briefly, because I do actually have something to share. So at that point, I had 6 positive points, which doesn't technically mean that I can buy anything, because the minimum I can spend is 10 points for 1 eyeshadow, but I did get a gift. So basically, this is the gift that I should have gotten for my birthday last year, for my 30th birthday, from my friend Martina. But we met up in November around my birthday, but she forgot it at home. And then, you know, we were supposed to meet up later, but we couldn't, and it's just been postponed for different reasons. And we finally met up at the beginning of June. So I finally got my present, and I'm very, very grateful and excited, because she got me the Yucca palette from Natasha Denona. Yucca, I can't remember how you say it, but I'm going to say Yucca because that's what's natural to me. But I'm so grateful. This is the palette right here. Since this is a gift, it's okay to bring into my collection. This is what it looks like on the inside. Such a beautiful warm green color story, which is exactly what I love. I love these type of warm greens, and I can't wait to play around with this one. But yeah, that one came into my collection. And since this one has 15 shades, that is 150 points that I now have to earn back. But that's fine. You know, this is a palette that was on my wish list anyway, so I'm really happy about that. But it also does mean that I'm back into the negative, which is, you know, not ideal, but it is fine. So that's going to be my goal for now, is to get back up into the positives again. We were there very briefly, guys, but things happen, and again, I'm very grateful for this palette, so I'm not going to complain. This is just like something fun anyway with my eyeshadow budget and bank and stuff, and I'm just overall really grateful to have this palette in my collection now. So looking at those numbers, that means that we're adding in 150 points into my eyeshadow bank, which now means that I am standing at minus 144 points, which is basically 14.5 eyeshadows. So we're going to have to start digging out of the negative again, but that's fine. This past month, I got quite a lot of points. 32 points is a lot in the 1 month. So maybe in 4 months time, I should be able to dig myself out if I keep up the usage. And hopefully as well, I should be starting to finish up more eyeshadows, which also will give a lot of points. So that is where my eyeshadow budget stands today. So that is the wrap up of that section. Next up, we're going to move into the 4 palettes that I've been working on in the past month, and talk you through the looks that I've made with them. So we're going to start off with the Natasha Denona Sendo palette, which is a really stunning palette. I'm going to insert some footage here of what it looks like. It is a really warm tone, peachy, kind of bronzy leaning palette on one half, and then on the second half, it is more kind of minty, taupey, greeny. I don't really know. It's a really unique kind of sea foamy undertone, but it's such a unique combination and color story overall, and this is what the palette looks like, of course. So this one was really fun to work on actually, because there was so much variety to it, and of course I'm going to go through the rankings later. But let me start off with the looks. So the first look we have right here is one where I took the shade Vigor in my outer corner, which is like the reddish tone in the palette. Then I took the shade Relief right next to it into the crease, and I blended everything out with the shade Calm. That is the first bulk of mattes. Then I took the shade Yama on the inner 2/3 of my lid, and the shade Aura on the outer 1/3 of my lids. and kind of blending that into the mattes. Lastly, we did a bit of a pop of kind of teal, and we took the shade Mantra as a liner, which is one of the cream to powders. And then right underneath it, we have the shade Breath, which is also cream to powder, and I put that one on my inner corner, and that was the first look. So this one was such a fun one, and it was a fun way to incorporate both sides of the palette. So we had both the warm tone kind of lid, the teal liner, as well as in the corner, and I really love how that look came out. That was look number 1. For look number 2, I wanted to do more of a kind of tealy, that's kind of seafoamy undertone look. So we started off with the shade Mantra in the outer corner, and I started blending that out in my lower crease with the shade Seal, which is in the bottom right corner. And then to blend everything out, I took the shade Breath again, which is right between them, and I started putting that into like the rest of my crease and blending everything out. For my outer lid, I went in with the shade Equilibrium, which is the deepest of the kind of greenish bluish shimmers. And then I took the shade Flow right above it on the center of my lid. And lastly, the shade Yama right below those two on my inner lid. For my lower lash line, I wanted to go into some of the more kind of warmer shades. So I took the shade Sense, which is in the bottom left corner, on my outer lower lash line, and then I blended that into the shade Tranquil, which is right next to it, on the center of my lower lash line, and that was the second look. Again, I really like this look. This one was more kind of out of my comfort zone, I guess, because it was wearing those like cool toned green shades, but I really did like how this one turned out as well. Then lastly, for day 3, I wanted to do more of a simple look. So I started off with the shade Balance, which is the kind of warm brown crease shade, and I put that into my crease. I then took the shade Mindful, which is a cream to powder again. I put that in my outer corner as well as on my lower lash line to deepen just everything up a little bit. For my lid, I took the shade Luster, which is right between those two, which is like a bronzy gold, and I put that again all over my lid. And then lastly, for this look, I took the shade Yama again, and I put that on my inner lid. And that was the final look for this palette. So yes, there we have the looks, and this is what the palette looks like now. It definitely looks a little bit more loved, which I'm really happy to see. I have a decent dip in the shade Luster now. But yeah, those were the 3 looks. Let me move on to my ranking of this palette. So for the ranking, for Color Story, I put a 4, and I said, this is such a fun color story. It has a clear divide between warm peachy tones and cool teals, but they also somehow go together so well. It's definitely a classic Natasha Denona color story, because it's so thought through. So I gave it a 4 there. For versatility, I said 4, and I said you can create a lot of different looks. Some warm brown everyday looks, extremely warm peachy looks, super cool tone teal looks that still lean neutral, and of course anything in between. There are maybe a few things missing for a perfect 5, but there's a lot you can do with this palette. So again, 4 for that category. We have quality next, and again I gave it a 4 here, and I said this has the same great Natasha Denona quality as I'm used to. The mattes are nice, the creamy mattes are elite, and the shimmers are also nice. It is such a reliable quality, but I'm missing those super impactful and sparkly shimmers, which is why I only gave it a 4. For personal ranking, I gave it a 3, and I said I like this palette so much more than I thought I would. This is a palette that I never really thought about buying, but I got it from my friend at a very discounted price. I think she sold it to me like around £15, which was amazing. And I do really love the looks that I made, but it's not a favorite palette, so it falls somewhere in the middle for me. So that is the final ranking for this palette. And adding all of that up, it means that it got 15 out of 20 points. So that is the ranking for my Sendo palette. Lastly, to talk about, I want to go through what shades I used. And I used most shade 1s. A couple of them I used more than once, which is the shade Mantra I used twice. We also have the shade Breath, I also used twice. We have the shade Yama right here, which I used 3 times. And then again, the rest of the shades I used once. So that is this palette. I'm really happy that I worked on this one. It was such a fun one, but let's move on to palette number 2. So for palette number 2, we have one of my Pat McGrath palettes, and this is the Bronze Seduction palette, which looks like this. It is such a beautiful color story. It is a bit smokier, but it also has some like lighter options too, if you want to make some not so deep looks. The special shades in here are absolutely stunning. They're some of my favorites, and there's just a lot to do with this palette. But let me start going through the looks so you can see what I'm talking about. So for day one, I actually did this look twice because I did this one for my work summer party. We had like a Casino Royale theme, so I wanted to do something like sultry, sparkly, beautiful kind of eye look. So I decided to do this eye look right here, and I started off with the shade Entrapment in my crease, which is the second shade in the palette. And then I put the shade Rose Gold 005 all over my lid, which is one of my favorite shades ever, which is that kind of rose gold shade. Then I took the shade Disobedient in my outer corner, which is the deepest brown in the palette. And I really kind of created this wing shape. I did have some tape down to really create that wing shape. And I used blended between the two browns, used to create a really nice gradients. Then lastly for this look, I took the shade Astral Luna Gold, which is the lightest kind of gold iridescent shade in the bottom right corner. And I put that one on my inner corner as well as my inner lid, just to brighten the look up a little bit and add even more sparkles. And that was the first look. For day two, I wanted to do more of a kind of a subtle look, a more everyday look with this palette. So I started off with the shade Entrapment again in my crease, which is the lightest matte shade. For my outer corner, I went in with a shimmer actually, which is right next to it on the center of the top row. And that is the shade Bronze Blaze. I put that on my outer corner just to get a little bit of a definition. Then for all over my lid, I went in with the shade VR Fire Opal, which is the last shade on the top row. And I just kind of went that all over the lid as like the shimmer shade. And then for my inner corner, I went in with the first shade in the palette, which is the inner corner shade, like the more kind of satiny inner corner shade. And I put that in my inner corner. And by the way, that shade is called Skin Show Divine Glow. And that was the second look, a much simpler look, but it was a nice everyday look as well. However, we're going to move away from more everyday looks and go into this beautiful look right here, which is more of a fiery look. And this one, I started off with the shade Blitz Flame all over my lid and lower lash line, which is the red shade in the palette. I wanted like more of a fiery base for this look. I then went in with the shade Entrapment in my crease, which is again that lightest crease shade, and just blended everything out. And I went back and forth between those shades. I then took the shade Extreme Aubergine, which is the more kind of aubergine dark deepening shade on the bottom row. And I put that in the outer corner very lightly just to deepen it up a tiny bit. Then for the star of the show, I went in with the shade Astral Luna Gold, which is the last shade in the palette. And I put that all over my lid as a topper, as well as on my inner corner. And this shade top on top of that red creates this beautiful fiery orange, as you could have seen in the footage. But I really love how these turned out together, and I absolutely love this look. It was very fun, and it just shows how much versatility is in these Pat McGrath palettes. So yes, those were all of the looks. For the users, I went into most shades again once. The ones that I went into more than once were the shade Entrapment 4 times, Rose Gold 005 twice, then once, and then once for everything apart from Astral Rose Gold, which I went into 3 times. So those were my uses for this palette. So when it comes to the color story, I gave this one a 4, and I said this palette is more of a neutral palette, and it might not look like the most innovative color story. However, it is so cleverly made. There's only 3 mattes, but they do provide such a range of depth, and the more neutral shimmers are paired with some transformative shades that are absolutely amazing and give so much to the color story overall. So 4 there. For versatility, I gave it a 3, and I said you can definitely do a lot with this palette. You can make soft, sparkly looks, really smoky looks, pure neutral looks, or ones with pops of colors. However, you can't do a fully colorful look, and the pops are limited to red, fiery gold, or green. So then I gave it a 3 for that category. For quality, I gave it a 5. I say this palette has that amazing Pat McGrath formula. The mattes blend like a dream. The special shades are some of the most sparkly shades out there. The shadows can also be built on each other, and it's such a pleasure to work with, so 5 in that category. Then for personal ranking, I gave it a 4. I said I love this palette, but it's not one of my very favorite palettes, but almost. I love the special shades and the lightest mattes. However, the palette is quite dark for me personally, and that's the main reason I can't give it a 5. So 4 in that category. And adding all of that up, this palette scored 16 out of 20 points. So we have 2 more palettes to talk about. The next one is this palette right here, which is from Kaleidos, and this is the Sashimi City palette, which looks like this. It's a beautiful 6-pan palette, which is more neutral. It has like some really unique undertones, but it's more of a softer color story, and I really do love this palette quite a bit. So yeah, I wanted to work on this one now in early summer because I feel like this color story just screams spring into summer for me. but that is the palette right there. Let me move into the first look. And for day one, I went into the shade Promenade on my outer corner, which is the first shade in the palette, which is the slightly lighter matte. Then I took the shade Pink Ginger all over my lid, which is the pink shimmer shade. And then the shade Salmon Skyline in my crease and my lower lash line, which is the peach shade right next to it. Lastly, for this look, I went in with the shade Penthouse on my inner corner, which is the kind of gold sparkle shade. And that was the final shade for this look. So more of a pink leaning look, like a pink peach leaning look. But I really loved how this one turned out. I wore it out for midsummer. So in Sweden, we have this holiday called Midsummer. And I celebrated that here in Clapham Common in London. And I wore this look then. I really, really loved how it turned out. It was very, very nice, sparkly, and not too bold, but still a little bit out there. For day two, I wanted to do more of a kind of yellowy, gold leaning look. So I went in with the shade Gourmet on my crease and my lower lash line, which is that kind of more yellowy matte. Then I went in with the shade Soy Sauce on like really close to my lash line, which is the darkest brown in the palette. Then I blended that out with the shade Promenade, and I swatched that kind of to blend out the darker shade and then blend it up over my lid. Then for the start of the show, the final shade is again that shade Penthouse, which is the kind of more gold shimmer. I put that as a topper shade all over my lid as well as on my inner corner. And that is the final look for look two. For day three, again, I wanted to do more of a soft look. And I went in with the shade Salmon Skyline again, which is that kind of more peachier crease shade. And I put that in my crease, all over the lid and on my lower lash line. So basically all over. And then I topped that off with the shade Penthouse again, which is that goldeny shimmer shade, and I put that again all over my lid as well as my inner corner, and that was the final look. I only used those two shades, but I wanted to make more of a simple look again, so that is the final look. So that is it for this palette right here. Regarding the uses, I used quite a few shades, and in here we actually have my first Expand Those pans because we have my first pan showing. So out of these shades, I randomized my pan, and the shade that I got is the shade Salmon Skyline right here. So this one I wanted to use 5 times, and I'm happy to say that I did so. Apart from that, I used the shade Promenade twice, Penthouse 3 times, and then the rest of the shades I used once, apart from, again, Salmon Skyline. So let's go through the ranking of this palette as well, and let's start with Color Story. So I gave this one a 3, and I said this is such a soft, lovely color story. It has that soft romantic undertone without going too pink. And there's just something about these types of shades that I can't put my finger on, but I love it. The color story isn't the most innovative, but it has everything you need for an everyday look. So 3 in that category. For versatility, I gave it a 2, and I said, okay, yes, I love the color story, but it is really quite limiting when it comes to versatility. You can slightly switch the undertone of the look between peach, yellow, pink, and gold, but it's very light to mid-toned, and therefore it falls in the lower end at a 2. For quality, I gave it a 5, and I said these shades are so nice to work with, the mattes are so buttery, and the shimmers are that PC sparkle that I love, and I really can't fault it. So 5 in that category. Then for personal ranking, I gave it a 4, and I said this is a palette that I look at so fondly, and these type of undertones are straight up my alley, and I love the sparkles. The mattes aren't super dark, so it's a no-brainer palette for me. The only thing that ducks a point is that it doesn't really spark my creativity at all. So again, 4 for that category. And adding that up, this palette scored in at 14 out of 20 points. So that is the third palette, and let's move on to the final one. And the final palette I have to talk about is this one right here, which is the Aha Honey palette from ColourPop, which is a monochromatic yellow palette. It looks like this. Just to note quickly, I have actually switched out the shade Sunburst to another matte shade. I didn't like the formula of Sunburst anymore. It was really disintegrating in quality, but otherwise the palette is still its own kind of palette. But yeah, it's a really beautiful yellow tone color story. It is, of course, a monochromatic color story, but that is what it looks like. So I'm going to jump straight into the looks, and we're going to start off with day number 1, where I took the shade Buzzkill on my inner and outer corner, which is the deepest shade in the palette. Then I moved into the shade next to it called Oh Behave to blend both that inner and the outer crease. Then I took the shade Stinger, which is the lighter shade in the palette, and I continued to blend everything into like the rest of my crease. And that was it for the mattes. For the shimmers, I went in with the shade Dandy on my center lid, which is the kind of most bright yellow shimmer in the palette. And I topped that slightly in the very center of the lid with the shade Palooza, which is the pressed glitter in the center of the palette. And I put that again just on the center of my lid. Lastly, for this look, I took the shade Totally Buggin' and on my lower lash line, which is the more kind of neutral leaning orangey kind of shade at the bottom left corner, and that was the first look. For look number 2, I took the shade Buzzkill on my crease, outer corner and lower lash line, which is again that deepest shade in the palette. I wanted to create more of a bronzy look here and try to stay away from the super yellow tones. So all over my lid I took the shade Queen Bee, which is again the bronzier of the shimmers, and again I put that all over my lid. And then lastly I took the shade Stinger, which is the matte kind of lightest shade in the palette, and I put that on my inner corner for a kind of bright matte inner corner shade, and that was that look. Only 3 shades, but again I wanted to keep it quite simple. For the third and final look, I wanted to do something different again, and I went in with an all matte look. So I took the shade Buzzkill again on my outer corner and crease, which is that deepest shade, and I blended that out with the shade Sunburst, which is that replaced shade on the top row. For the lid, I went in with the shade Oh Behave, which is the brightest yellow on the bottom row, and again I put that on my center of my lid just to give that bright pop of color, even though I didn't have any shimmers on. Then for my inner lid and my inner corner, again I went in with the shade Stinger just to create that kind of brightness there, and that was the final look. So again, that is what the palette looks like. And since again I already have pan on this palette, I did have some options for the Expandos pans, and the one that I rolled in is this one right here, which I'm quite happy with actually, because it was needed for a lot of looks because it's the only like deepish shade in the palette, and again that is Buzzkill. And I wanted to reach for that one 5 times, and I was able to do so. Then apart from that, in the palette, I reached for Stinger 3 times, I reached for Sunburst twice, and then I reached for the shade Oh Behave twice as well, and then the rest of the shades I only reached for once. So those were all of the looks that I made with this palette. Again, let's go through the ranking before I wrap up the video. So for Color Story, I gave it a 2, and I said this really isn't an innovative color story at all. It is a monochromatic palette, so there's not much variety here, but even so, the yellow tones are all similar-ish and give similar looks. I wish it went a little deeper and had a lighter inner corner shimmer, so that is why I gave this one a 2. For versatility, I gave it a 1, and I said yellow, that is the look you can expect. Yes, it might be a little brighter or bronzier, it might be all matte or shimmer heavy, it might be a blush of color or deeper, but not really. But it's all going to come out yellow. So basically, I feel like the palette doesn't run deep at all. It's a little side note. The deepest shade is the shade here, which really isn't deep at all. So yeah, really not much versatility in this palette, as you could probably have seen from the looks as well. For quality, I gave it a 4, and I said the quality is actually quite nice, especially for yellow shades. The shimmers are quite good for ColourPop, and the mattes blend really nice. ColourPop is never going to be the best, but it is pretty good, so a 4, which is probably the highest it could have ranked, because again, I don't think I would give ColourPop a 5, because it's not my favorite type of formula. Then lastly, for my personal ranking, I was debating between a 2 and a 3, but I decided ultimately to go for a 3, because I do like yellow looks, and I did like the looks that I made with this palette, even though they were quite repetitive, and the third look I made, I felt like I was already done with the palette, but I did like the look. So I said, I like this palette, I do. Whenever I want to do a yellow look, I like having this palette, as it's one of those colors that I prefer to do as a monochromatic look. Could I do without it? Yes, probably, but it doesn't mean I don't appreciate it, so I'm going to give it a 3. So that is the final score. And summing those up, this palette comes in at 10 out of 20 points, which is actually my lowest ranked palette yet. And I do think that is mainly because, again, the versatility and the color story, because yeah, it's just not the best. But that is it for that palette right there. I am actually going to do a video coming up in a couple of days, I believe, where I score all of my palettes from this project so far. So I'm going to do a halfway update and go through the ranking of my palettes. So looking at like which one was my least ranked palette, this one right here, going up to my top ranked palette. But again, that is something for another video. I just wanted to give you a heads up that that is coming very soon. So those were all of the palettes that I've been working on in the past month. The last thing to do is to introduce you to the new palettes coming in. And I'm just going to jump straight into it. So the first palette we have is this one right here, which is the Amrezy palette from Anastasia. This is what the palette looks like, and it's like a pink to warm kind of color story. It's a large Anastasia palette as well. It has 2 extra shades than the normal kind of format like this. it is a really stunning palette, and I think it's going to work really nicely for this season. So I'm excited to roll it in. And before I talk about the next palette, we have quite a few options here for expand those pans. I have shade on, so I have pan on Barb, Cupcake, I think it is, right? A Cupcake, Georgina right here. We have Reese and Anastasia. So those are the pans that I have. So how many it's at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 pans. So let me go ahead and randomize a shade already for my expand those pans to see what I get. Oh, so they changed the app now, but let's go. I'm hoping for Barb, but I'm not sure. Okay, it's going to be, oh no. I think it's going to be the one that I wanted the least, which is Reese. Yeah, it is. Okay, it's the bright pink. Do I want to work on that one? Not really. Just handpick. Honestly, any of that shade would have been better. I do really want to, I'm going to handpick this time. I'm going to go in with Barb because it is my favorite shade in the palette, and I really love this one, and I want to get some more use out of it before it completely dries up. So I'm going to go in with that shade. Maybe that's cheating. I promise you that I am going to randomize for the other palettes, but that is the shade right there. I do really want to work on it because, again, it was one of my absolute favorite shades, and I can see that the formula is declining a little bit. So I'm going to roll in Barb for my expand those pans. Let's go into palette number 2, and we have a Natasha Denona palette next. We actually have 2 Natasha Denona palettes coming up, but this is the Sunrise palette, which looks like this. It is a beautiful, warm sunrise, sunset kind of color story. I really, really love this one. I love the kind of reddish pink shades and the warm orange yellow shades, and it also has some more neutral tones, and it's really, really stunning. I absolutely love this palette, and I think, again, it's going to be perfect for this time of year. So I'm going to roll this one in for my second palette in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project for next month. I'm really, really excited to play around with this one, and I don't have any pans on this palette, so no shades for expand those pans for now. Then the second one is my gold palette, which is again from Natasha Denona, and this is one of my absolute favorite palettes in my collection. It looks like this. It is a beautiful kind of neutral color story with a little bit of a different undertone. It does look very gold when you look at it first, but it does have some more neutral shades, some more kind of taupier shades, and then it also has those teals, and I'm really, really excited to play around with this one. Again, it's one of my favorite palettes, so I can't wait to reach for this one and make 3 looks with it. Again, no pans in this palette, so nothing for expand those pans right there. But again, that is going to be the third palette that I'm rolling in. Currently, my rules are that I work on 3 palettes and then my product level up palette, unless I have already been working on my product level up palette in this project. So currently, I am on the second month of my product level up level 4 palette, which is why I had 4 palettes to work on last month instead of 3, because I had already done those 3 looks with my product level up palette. However, since we are getting towards end of the year, or like halfway point of the year, I have already ranked quite a few of my palettes. So the chance of rolling something into my product level up that I already worked on in this project is getting higher each month. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a backup palette to have as my roll in case my product level up is something that I already worked on, or if I don't hit my goal before the update. So this month for my backup palette, I have this palette right here, which is my Through My Eyes palette from ColourPop. And this one is a beautiful color story. It has quite a lot of pans, so there's going to be a lot of options for expand those pans. But it has kind of some more neutral shades, some very orangey, fiery red shades. It has some teals, some purple, some taupe. So it's a very versatile palette, and it's one that I've loved over the years. It's one of my favorite ColourPop palettes. But I'm excited to see how I feel about it now, so I can't wait to roll this one in. And for expand those pans, again, there's a lot of options. We have pan on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 shades. So all shades apart from 5, I think. Yes. So we're going to roll 1 to 11 and see what I get. So we're going to go ahead and randomize again and see what I get. We get 6. Okay, not my favorite shade, but it will work. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the shade Euphoric right there is going to be the one I roll in for expand those pans. So again, if I roll something or if I work on something in product level up that I can't work on in this project, this is going to be my backup palette. But again, the other 3 comes first. And if I roll this one in, that is going to be my shade for expand those pans. So those are going to be my 2 focuses. And if I don't roll this palette in, I'm only going to focus on Barb right there. But that is going to be it for my update. Now I can look at my audio footage and I have 48 minutes of footage, which is crazy. So I'm going to wrap up the video here. I'm not going to rabble on too much. If you did like this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And also let me know what palette you think is going to rank the highest. If you remember, kudos to you, but otherwise, which palette out of the ones I've tested so far do you think is going to rank the highest in my scoring video? But I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.